I married him, not his whole family. That was the sentence that turned me into a selfish villain in the eyes of the world. But has anyone ever asked me, just a 24-year-old girl who hadn't even had the chance to live for herself, if I was truly ready to become a mother to two orphaned kids overnight? I loved him. We had plans, we had dreams, we had luxurious trips waiting for us. But then tragedy struck. His parents died. And just like that, his two little siblings became an unexpected burden. And me, I was suddenly thrown into the role of a mother without ever being given the choice. Am I a terrible person for not being endlessly selfless? Or am I simply someone brave enough to be honest about what I want from my life? I met him for the first time on a rainy afternoon that soaked the college courtyard. We both took shelter under the library's eaves. Some might say college love is nothing more than a fleeting dream, fragile and too weak to withstand the storms of real life. But back then, that love was the most beautiful thing I had ever known. We fell for each other at 18. Together, we faced countless exams, part time jobs, and late night coffee talks about the future. He was always calm and gentle, while I was ambitious, drawn to beauty, and dreamed of a life filled with both love and success. At 21, we got married, not in haste, but with confidence. He opened a small construction supply store. I started a bridal boutique. Each day that passed, I felt like we were building our version of a modern marriage. Two young people working side by side, earning together, shaping the life we wanted with our own hands. We didn't have a big house or a fat savings account, but we shared a deep sense of unity and a promising 5-year plan. Work hard, save for a home, travel at least once a year, and have our first child by 27 when we'd be ready, both financially and emotionally. We made it clear from the beginning. Marriage should be a space where both partners grow. It shouldn't be a burden or a one-sided sacrifice. I didn't mind taking care of him when he was sick. I didn't mind staying up late to help him calculate inventory. And I certainly would never leave him, even if one day he wasn't well. Because I made a promise to him, my husband, with all my heart. But somewhere along the way, that promise was misinterpreted, as if I had agreed to take on full responsibility for his entire family, including things I never consented to. I understood he was a man of responsibility. When his parents passed away, he didn't hesitate to take his two younger siblings into our home. I didn't blame him. In fact, I admired him even more for it. But in that moment, I also realized our entire future, the one we dreamed up and worked so hard to build together, had changed course overnight. No warning, no discussion, no choice. And no matter how deeply I loved him, I started to wonder, is love alone enough to fill the growing space left by the freedom I'm losing? By the loss of control over my own life? I used to believe that nothing could ever derail our marriage from its set course. But then, one phone call in the middle of the night changed everything. His parents had been in a terrible car accident. They didn't have time for goodbyes, left behind no will, no instructions, just an old house, and two young siblings suddenly orphaned. As I stood outside the hospital watching my husband, pale and shaken, holding those two kids who barely understood what was happening, I froze. Not because I didn't feel for them, I did, but because I knew deep down, from that very moment, nothing would ever be the same again. He decided to bring them home. I didn't object. How could I? They were his blood. Two children who just lost everything in a single day. I'm not heartless. I cared about them, but caring doesn't mean I was ready to become their mother, especially not at 24, when I was still figuring out how to be a wife. At first, I thought I could adapt, but I underestimated the weight of the word responsibility when it shows up uninvited. Every morning, I woke up early to make meals for 4, then rushed off to the store. At night, the house echoed with noise, homework, school drama, tears, and preteen rebellion. He was twice as busy, and I was completely drained. Bit by bit, the life that used to be ours was being chipped away by 1,000 unspoken obligations. Money became a quiet, constant wound. Even with stable incomes, we were never prepared to financially support 3 kids at once, especially when we hadn't even had one of our own yet. The savings we'd set aside for buying our first home were slowly drained by tuition, uniforms, medicine, and daily expenses. The vacations I'd always dreamed of crossed out. Weekends that were once meant for us turned into battles over chores and discipline. I didn't blame him, but I couldn't stop the quiet sighs that escaped behind our bedroom door. I used to think love was enough, but love can't substitute what I was never ready for: the role of a mother, the quiet sacrifices, a future I never chose. I began to feel myself disappearing. Every conversation became about test scores, school fights, or a budget that wouldn't stretch far enough. When I brought up the idea of having another relative help raise the kids, just temporarily, he looked at me as if I had just betrayed something sacred. I knew he was hurting, but so was I. Hurting because I couldn't say the one truth I kept swallowing: I don't want this life anymore. I miss who I used to be: a young woman who loved life, fashion, travel, someone who wanted to live boldly and colorfully. I never imagined 24 would mean late nights tutoring math, reminding kids to brush their teeth, or checking homework. There's nothing wrong with those things, but they aren't my dream. Not right now. I kept it all inside until one day I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the eyes staring back at me. And I knew if I kept going like this, I'd turn into someone even I couldn't forgive. And the most painful part of it all, I still love him. But sometimes love isn't strong enough to hold 2 people together, especially when they're no longer walking the same path. I didn't leave him right after everything fell apart. I stayed. I tried. I pushed myself to become a good enough wife by society's standards, but with each passing day, I sank deeper into the feeling that I was living someone else's life. I no longer saw myself in the smallest things: in the favorite dress stained with dishwater, in the dinners interrupted by a baby's cries. Even in the moment I held our credit card and realized somewhere along the way, I had paused my own dreams. When I told him I was thinking about divorce, he went silent. He wasn't angry. He didn't yell. He just stared at me for a long time, like he was trying to find the girl he once loved, the girl he had promised a future full of happiness. But we both knew that girl wasn't there anymore. We had changed. Not because we stopped loving each other, but because life pulled us in opposite directions. He became an unexpected father, carrying the weight of 2 younger siblings, and me. I was still a young woman who wanted to live for herself, who wanted freedom, who wanted to walk the world on her own 2 feet. We were no longer standing side by side. We were just clinging to a shared memory that had already faded. I know, he doesn't deserve to be abandoned. He's a kind man, a responsible one, a man caring too much without ever complaining. But he deserves a partner who's ready to walk with him on this new path, a path that now includes 2 children. And that person isn't me. I also know that if I stayed, I wouldn't be able to truly love those kids. I'd grow bitter, tired, and eventually I'd resent him. I don't want to become the woman who always frowns, always snaps, because she feels like she gave up everything without a choice. Because when you're forced to live a life your heart doesn't belong to, resentment quietly eats away the best parts of you. I'm not a cruel person, but I'm not a saint either. I don't want to take his siblings away from him, and I definitely don't want to make him choose between family and wife. So I chose to step back, as gently and quietly as I could. No fights over property, no hurtful words, just returning freedom to him and to myself. My family disagreed. My mother cried. My father scolded me. My sister, who once divorced a cheating husband, said I didn't know how to appreciate a good man. But they don't live this life. They weren't the ones waking up at 2 a.m. to crying. They weren't the ones canceling flights because of a kid's school schedule. They weren't the ones watching friends check in from Paris while calculating the power bill. I heard it all. And in the end, I chose to listen to myself. Because I believe compassion isn't forcing yourself to live a role that was never meant for you. Love isn't forgetting yourself just to make everyone else happy. And marriage, no matter how beautiful it seems, should never become a prison if you no longer feel like you belong there. So I left. Quietly. No door slamming, no tears, just footsteps walking away from a house. In hopes that one day, both he and I will find the place where we truly belong. I never expected that choosing to leave this marriage would make me the center of so much criticism. It wasn't just my family speaking out. Friends, acquaintances, neighbors, even strangers online all chimed in, calling me selfish, heartless, and a traitor to my marriage vows. They asked me, "Didn't you promise to stay together through thick and thin? What if your husband lost his legs in an accident? Would you leave him then? So, what was your love? Just a vacation romance?" At first, it hurt. It felt like everyone was using their sense of compassion to pressure me into living a life they themselves didn't have to endure. But over time, I began to see the truth. They weren't defending love. They were defending an idealized version of love, a fantasy they believed in, not the reality I was living. I didn't leave him because life got hard. If he lost his job tomorrow, I would work twice as hard to carry us through. If he were in an accident, I'd be the one pushing his wheelchair for the rest of his life. Because I married him, not the circumstances, and certainly not a sense of duty imposed by others. But I didn't vow to raise two children who weren't mine. I didn't promise to become someone's mother at 24 when I wasn't even ready to have kids of my own. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for things you never chose. That's not commitment. That's self-erasure. People keep bringing up the vow, but they forget that even marriage vows have limits. They were never meant to be a life sentence of self-denial. They don't require you to lose who you are in order to prove your devotion. I started to realize something painful. As women, especially in the culture I come from, we're expected to give more, carry more, love unconditionally, even when those conditions are drowning us. People praise a good wife as someone who endures, accepts, stays silent, and carries burdens without complaint. And they call that love. But they don't see the shattered spirit behind the so-called strength, the abandoned dreams, the silent years of youth slipping away under the weight of roles you never got to choose. I once thought I'd be that kind of woman too. But when I stood at the crossroads, either keep living a marriage filled with inner conflict or walk away to reclaim myself, I chose the latter. Not because I stopped loving, but because I couldn't keep loving in a way that destroyed me. I know people won't understand. I know there will be disapproving looks, cold comments, whispers behind my back. But I also know that if I stay out of fear of judgment 5 or 10 years from now, I'll just be a shadow of the woman I once dreamed I could be. A woman who traded her soul for the approval of others. I'm not denying responsibility. I'm simply refusing to play a role I never agreed to take on. And if that makes me the bad guy in their story, so be it. I'd rather be a so-called bad person who is honest with herself than a so-called good woman living a lie with her own heart every single day. I left on an ordinary afternoon just like any other day. No tears, no shouting, no dramatic farewell scene like in the movies. Just me, quietly packing a few clothes, some personal items, leaving behind a letter, and stepping out of the house we once called home. I didn't take much with me. We didn't have kids, no house under our name, no shared finances to untangle. The only thing I truly wrestled with was love. Love that was still there, but not strong enough to keep me in a life that no longer felt like mine. He didn't call right away. A few days later, he finally sent one short message. Do you really want to end this? And after typing and erasing a dozen responses, I finally replied with just one line. I don't want to be someone's mother when I'm still not ready to mother myself. I knew he was hurt. I knew he was disappointed, but I also knew if I stayed, we would only keep breaking each other. He would grow bitter, blaming me for not being understanding enough. And I'd quietly resent him for unintentionally rewriting the path we once drew together. We'd argue over little things, hurt each other with careless words, and love would wither in silence. I didn't walk away because I didn't love him. I walked away because I loved myself enough to know where my limits were. I didn't want to look back at my youth with regret that I lived someone else's life, just so the world could say I was good at enduring. The society I grew up in doesn't teach women to say no. We are raised to be patient, to forgive, to sacrifice, but no one tells you sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's courage. I've come to realize marriage is not a permanent binding. It's a journey where both people must keep choosing each other, not out of obligation, but from freedom. And when one person no longer sees themselves in that shared journey, letting go is also an act of love. The final one, the most painful, but also the most honest. Now I live alone in a small apartment near my workplace. I'm picking up the dreams I once put on hold. Enrolled in an advanced bridal design course, planning a solo trip across the country in the coming months. Each day, I'm learning to forgive myself, not for failing to become the woman society expected, but for choosing to become the woman I can look in the mirror and smile at. I don't know how he's doing. I don't know if he's found someone new, someone ready to share the journey of raising his younger siblings, but I believe he'll be okay. He's strong, kind, and he deserves a family where every member chooses one another with genuine love. As for me, I'm okay too. Not because I'm happy right away, but because I finally dared to say the thing most people are too afraid to admit, that sometimes loving someone just isn't enough. What matters more is whether you can live true to yourself, even if it costs you the thing that hurts the most to lose. And maybe that's what real growth is. Not when you push yourself to live for someone else, but when you're brave enough to step back and finally live for you.